But one thing that was clear in his conversation, John and Kyle, like a coach and GM would, downplayed it. Not that he was going to return, but they were not pounding the table that he's getting traded, right? And Jimmy came out just as honest as can be. Like, it's over, guys. It's over. We've already had communications. Never forget, he has a no-trade clause. Like, they can't just trade him to the Texans. They can't just trade him anywhere. He does have a no-trade clause. He does have power in this. But one thing that I do think that is powerful, and Barrows tweeted this out. He basically said, in all my years of watching this, that's as honest as I've ever seen a player. And he basically gave credit to Kyle and John for, when they came in, the distrust, the anger, the backstabbing, just the vibe was the opposite of that. And listen, it starts with Jimmy, the character to handle this situation. But I do think the whole organization, and one thing that I think sometimes coaches lie about, like we told him from the jump. We were honest from the jump. We called Jimmy when we made the trade. You and I can speak for myself. I thought that was like, oh, okay, whatever. I do think looking back, like they were pretty transparent with him from the jump and this whole period of time, and it led to, I think, Jimmy staying in a good place all season, and now they're in a good spot, which sometimes these things can get messy. I think it's kind of going to be Alex Smith to Washington. Remember when Andy traded him? Like they're in a pretty good spot, which I think these relationships, it's hard to keep them in a good spot. Now it helps when you win playoff games, and the season ended well for Jimmy. But, it was a slippery slope to get to this point. But I'm just glad that Jimmy put it on the table. Like, this fucking thing's over.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if the Niners want to do what they want to do, they can do that. Now, they can't do it before mid-March. I think the end of the league year is when the no-trade clause expires, right, which is the middle of March. But, I mean, I would have a hard time, no-trade clause or no-trade clause, seeing the Niners force something on him.
Wait. You were saying when the new league year starts, his no-trade clause is no longer in the contract with his 1 year remaining?
Correct.
So technically, the moment free agency starts, they could do whatever they wanted?
Right.
I didn't know that.
March 16th, they can do whatever they want.
So he basically had a no-trade clause up until the last year of his, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. So, it may be the last year that, a lot of times what the truly what's on paper with the contract is different than how everybody understands it'll play out. Because the reality is you don't play on the last year of a contract. If you're a quarterback, I mean, you do, but it's an odd. I know.
You see Ziegler's quote?
I know. So I shouldn't say that. But anyway, but again, and I've maintained this the whole time when the no-trade clause comes up.
Star quarterbacks don't. I think, you could argue a guy. Jimmy's probably right on the fringe. It'll be interesting. I don't know. I'm fascinated to watch Jimmy.
Yeah, but I just to make this point about the no-trade clause, and I've made this point the whole time, is like because he does have a year on his contract, the team that is getting him is going to want to talk to him about what his contract needs to look like.
Yeah.
And if Jimmy, let's say the Niners, we're trading him to the Texans. Well, technically they can do that on March 17th, even if he says, I do not want to play for the Texans. But it's not in the Texans' best interest to take on Jimmy Garoppolo at whatever his contract's going to be worth next year, $27 million, whatever it goes up to, right? So he is going to have some power in this, even when he technically doesn't have some power in it. I would imagine. That's my guess.
I think it's going to be a team effort. I think they're going to be on the same page. I think what they're going to do is kind of let Don Yee facilitate it, and ultimately they're going to have to say yes or no to the compensation. But I think it's going to be one of those letting him run it, and you have to just get us on the same page with the deal because of what you've meant. Like, I think they really value the one thing that came through with John and Kyle is they really value Jimmy Garoppolo, the person. And that, and we'll talk about it later, like, that's important. I think Andy, when he traded Alex got a lot of money, if you remember. Do you remember when Alex was traded to the football team? They were the Redskins at the time. People were like, they just gave him $75 million. And they also traded like a second-round pick. There is a chance that whoever Jimmy is traded to...
Wasn't there a player in that deal, too?
Yeah, they got a corner, and I think in a third-round pick. Maybe it was a second. But I just remember Alex getting a lot of money and people being floored. Now, Alex was a better player than Jimmy, but I do believe there's a chance that breaking news, the 49ers have agreed in principle with X team. Jimmy Garoppolo will be traded for a 4th-round pick or a 3rd-round pick, a conditional pick, whatever, and is signed a 2-year extension for $38 million. Like, some people are like, what? That is very possible.
Yeah.
We see
Kyle
it happen
Fuller.
every year.
Kyle Fuller, good call. Yeah, it's because that's what you do with starting quarterbacks, right?
I think it's his brother. The Fuller.
Oh, it's not Kyle.
Kyle was the Bears. That was his brother.
Kendall Fuller. Kendall Fuller, and a 3rd for Alex Smith.
Fuller's dad had some pretty good, pretty powerful sperm there.
Yeah, no relation to Fuller from.
I don't know any Fullers.
No, the Fuller, easy there, Fuller. Anyway, someone else will get it. So a 3rd-round pick and Kendall Fuller. A part of that, if you're the team acquiring Jimmy, the compensation is going to probably be a part of what you're willing to pay. In other words, if you hear from Don Yee, like, all right, it's going to take 2 years and $42 million, you're like, well, I'm not giving up a 3rd-round pick for that guy, right?
Yeah, I think the Niners would gladly do like a 4th-round pick and a Fuller.
And a Fuller. Yeah.
And you could argue that's a lot.
I think the player becomes a lot.
Well, remember when Alex went to Washington, remember that before he got hurt, I think they were like 6-2 or 7-2. Like, he was good. It was like he had just maintained his solid play. Like, is Jimmy as good of a player as Alex was? He's not. Alex was a little, at that point, less dependent on what was around him. He could just be an above-average player. It can't really be argued that Jimmy does need some stuff around him. Like, he can't just go to the worst team and you go, we got our quarterback, he can help elevate us, right? Because Breer reported that the football team is going to be sniffing around everybody. And they think that they already have some core pieces with some talent. Obviously, McLaren, draft a guy, right? Maybe another wide receiver. I think they make a lot of sense. You could argue Pittsburgh. Najee Harris, they already got a bunch of wide receivers. That might not be a terrible place. They are not going to try to lose, right?
Alex was coming off a 26 touchdown, 5 interception season.
Best year of his career.
Now he had Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, Kareem Hunt.
Do you have the following, like what he did until he got injured? Was he having a good statistical season in 2000?
Yeah, 18. He played 10 games he'd started, was 6-4, 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So he was not having the same year, as you might imagine, but he still wasn't turning it over. He wasn't throwing the ball downfield nearly as much as he had the year before, understandably, in Kansas City. But yeah, it was going well.
I think a team would gladly trade if they know they can get 10-5 and be 6-4 with Jimmy as their quarterback, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, part of the question, and you brought this up, we've talked about this a lot. The acquiring team goes, we don't know if we're getting them, how many games we're getting them for.
Alex is much more durable.
Here's what Jimmy would argue. It was like, well, I only missed 1 game this year. Right?
He missed a half.
But you know that it felt very different than only missed 1 game.
Yeah.
This year. So, I think the teams
No, he missed 2.
He missed 2 games this year?
Well, because Trey Lance had 2 starts, Arizona and Texans.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Because he had multiple injuries. He had the calf injury that knocked him out of a half. He missed
and the hand injury.
He missed 2.5 games.
Well, yeah, you don't count the half game. He started that game. That's the way they count these things. But you're right, missed 2 starts.
I'm saying Jimmy says that, but if I'm the team, it's like, well, you missed.
No, that's my point. It's like what it looks like if you look at the box score and how it felt if you look at his season and how it felt are 2 different things, right? Yeah. You see, because what you see is 15. You're like 15 starts. You'd sign up for that.
I think the conversation in these meetings, and I've been not privy to the meeting with like the owner, head coach, like, are we doing this or not? Just the basic, like, let's just talk about the player with your couple pro scouts, your GM, and your personnel director. What are his biggest red flags? I would say his turnover prone just nature and his injuries are kind of equals. Because if he was just completely durable with some of his turnover prone, I think you would be cool with it. You'd be like, I got this durable player. He never misses a game. But I think you can just not count on him. I give a 3rd-round pick for a guy that I probably want to extend just so I have him under a more cap friendly number, but it's like if he's my starter for the next 2 years, am I getting 34 games? Do I feel confident that I'm getting 30 starts?
No.
I don't think.
Well, one thing I said last year before the draft, and I think I was not totally correct. I think I was partly correct, which was that the reason they were drafting Trey Lance, they said, was based on availability of Jimmy Garoppolo. And at the time, my take was that sounds good. It sounds respectful of Jimmy, but that's not why you're doing this. You're doing this because you know you need a better quarterback to win, and you're going to need a better quarterback soon. With hindsight, I don't think that wasn't totally made up, because I don't think they would have done the deal 2 1s plus a 1 swap plus a third if Jimmy Garoppolo just played every game for the previous 2 years, if he had just come off a full season. So I think it was ultimately what they needed to do and what they wanted to do. What they needed to do was to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. I think this organization needed to do that, especially as their other young star players begin to come into a window where they need to get paid. It's clear they're going to need more from their quarterback. And I think that if the Niners had just ended this season that they just played without a Trey Lance on their roster, it would feel like they were in a more helpless place than they actually are, because they have Trey Lance on their roster, right? Like, how are they going to get a Trey Lance level prospect this year? What would we be talking about?
Well,
can you pull Tom Brady out of retirement?
Kyle Shanahan
Can you trade for Aaron Rodgers? Are you going to trade? Is Questy going to send you Kirk Cousins? Like, what would we be talking about right now if Trey Lance wasn't on the roster?
I think we'd be talking about that.
It would. That's why I think Kyle, watching his press conference, was pretty optimistic. I think he's actually, all things considered, feeling pretty good about things, because I think he's pretty excited for what comes next here with Trey. And I think, just as someone who watches them, I would like having a first-round pick this year would not sound more fun to me right now than having Trey Lance on the roster.
Well, especially pick 29. Like, you're not getting Kenny Pickett at pick 29. The other thing, and we talked about this at the time, and listen, I have no clue if the guy's going to be good or not. He's physically gifted. I think he's a major project, like most young quarterbacks are. He is way more. He would have been a top 5 pick in this draft. And let's face it, without quarterback, he would have been the number 1 pick in this draft. Right or wrong, he just would have. Hell, he was the number 3 pick in a way more loaded draft. And he would have had a guy named Justin Fields, who, if Justin Fields was coming off Ohio State in this class, where's Justin Fields going? I got news for you.
Numero uno.
So, hell, Mac Jones in this class is probably going top 10 coming off that Alabama season, right? He ain't lasting to 15. So, it just shows you that, I'm not trying to give them extra credit, and whether they factored in the bigger picture. They might have just been living like, we want this guy, we want to get up there, we like these prospects. The time is now. We don't want to lose anymore. Because they were much more in the moment, and they should have been, right? They had just gone 6-10. They had to focus on, we have a good team. It's about now, and we can keep Jimmy. That they were thinking, like, this following year, what about these quarterbacks? And I also had a buddy that told me that, like, is a college guy. He goes, even if you look at the next class, C.J. Stroud is an awesome player, right? I mean, smooth thrower. Bryce Young looks like a little skinnier Russell Wilson. Physically, they aren't what, like, Justin Fields and Trey Lance are. Like, you look at Bryce, he's not physically what Russell is. And CJ Stroud, which Kyle might have liked.
Narrow hips, as my old scouting buddy would say.
CJ Stroud, he is not an athlete. He's a thrower, right? He's a pocket quarterback.
Yeah.
Who again is going to go 1 probably or 2. So it's like, you're just not going to be in that mix. Think how lucky they had to get with Jimmy missing those 6 games. Like, Nick Mullins led them to some losses, right? Like, if Jimmy had played all 16 of those games, even if they would have been interested in getting the Fields or Trey Lance, even if the season kind of got derailed, they're 8-8 probably at worst, right? Remember the quarterback play against, like, the Eagles? Remember some of those games with Nick Mullins? It was like, as bad as Jimmy was, that stretch did put it into perspective. Like, God, it could be way worse.
Excalibur on YouTube says narrow hips. Is that a filtering category on Tinder?
Who do you got narrow-hipped? CJ or Bryce?
No, when you said Bryce, I said, as my old scouting buddy, you would say narrow hips. I don't know if he even has narrow hips, but
it's crazy. Narrow hips, like, in society, is a good thing. In football, it's like You love a kid. You see the ass on Kinlaw. You know, did you see the ass on Debo? Even they mentioned it today, right? Debo, without kind of saying it, Debo's built like a running back. What does that mean? He's fucking stout. He's thick.
Now I will say one little addendum to that Jimmy conversation, the whole draft thing. If they hadn't traded all those picks, I wouldn't have been shocked if they had taken Davis Mills like in the second round. But anyway, who knows? He would have made it to them in the third. We know that.
I do think he scared off a lot of people.
Well, he has durability issues. So you're going to replace Jimmy with a guy he had, at least in college, durability issues.
Didn't his teammate too that went to the Jags, the tackle Walker, same thing? He had been hurt a bunch, right?
He'd been hurt a lot. Yeah.